Hello, everybody, and welcome to Smart Software with SmartLogic, a podcast where we talk about best practices in web and mobile software development with a focus on new and emerging technologies. My name is Justus Eapen, and I'm your host today. I'm a developer here at SmartLogic, a Baltimore-based consulting company that has been building custom web and mobile applications since 2005. Our first series covers Elixir in production, and today I'm joined by Dan Ivovich and Eric Oestrich. They are a couple of developers here at SmartLogic that do the bulk of our production development environment work. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Dan, why don't you get us started?
Hi, thanks. My name's Dan Ivovich. I'm the Director of Development here at SmartLogic. I've been here almost 8 years and was kind of part of the decision to move to Elixir a couple of years ago, and I'm happy to be here.
And Eric?
Hey, I'm Eric Oestrich. I'm a developer here, and I am, I guess, the lead Elixir person, I guess you could say.
I think that's fair.
Great. And I am also a developer here, so we've got a great episode coming to you from SmartLogic today. We're going to be talking about Elixir in production. Dan, I want to start with you. If you could maybe give us a quick overview of the projects that we have in production here.
Sure. I'd say for the last 18 to 24 months or so, almost all of our new API and web-based work has been using Elixir and Phoenix. We do a lot of mobile applications, and most of their APIs now are powered by Elixir. We've got e-commerce ticketing systems in Elixir. We've got other kinds of, mostly a lot of commerce-related things. Data processing, Postgres databases. Kind of an interesting mix of technology all working together in Elixir.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, can you talk a little bit about why we are using Elixir in production? Like, what are some of the high-level advantages and maybe even disadvantages from your perspective?
Yes. We had a developer who was generally interested in functional programming and wanted to take a look around Elixir. And then we just kind of really liked how quick or how fast Elixir is and Phoenix and all of that, got suckered in with that. And fell in love with the language and all of OTP and all the nice features you just kind of get with it. Why I'd say we're using Elixir.
Great, and we might dive into some of the things that you just mentioned as far as like OTP, et cetera, is concerned. But I want to go back to Dan, and I want to talk a little bit about the hosting environment that we're using so people can get like sort of a very good high-level idea of what we're doing here. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about where we host our Elixir applications?
Yeah, sure. I would say we kind of started in our default, at least for spinning up a quick staging environment, is Heroku. We were traditionally a Ruby on Rails shop for, over the last 8 years, and, our familiarity with Heroku is pretty strong, and, offers a lot of really convenient and, well encapsulated services under one roof. So we certainly have started there and have some production things running there, especially things that we don't need some of the really low level, Phoenix and Elixir OTP networking node to node communication for. And then some of our larger things are deployed. We've done things in Linode, DigitalOcean, and of course AWS.
Mm-hmm. And when we're going to say AWS, Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about the deployment process that we have here, whatever tools we use, deployment scripts, that sort of thing?
We use Ansible to set up all of our underlying VPSs and servers. And we've also started switching to use Ansible to do the actual deployment as well. We have it set up to be very similar to how Capistrano does the deployment, where there's like a versions folder and then a current that gets symlinked to whatever the most recent release is. So we're not fully utilizing the benefits of OTP releases and whatnot, but this is a good stepping stone that is like proven to work. So that's what we've landed on currently. We use Distillery 2.0. Distillery. I'm not sure a lot of our apps are on 2.0 yet. Yeah.
And maybe for someone who is totally new to this, could you give me a definition of Ansible and distillery for someone, let's say, just like a junior developer?
Yeah, so Ansible is a tool that is like it's a known set of scripts. They call it a playbook in their terminology that will always set up the server the same way. And it's also idempotent, so if that step has already run, it has a way of knowing that that step ran and then skipping it. So it's a way to like always guarantee that your server looks the same as it should. So you can turn on the EC2 instance, install Python. This is the one small manual step you have to do, unless Python's already there. And then Ansible connects via SSH and then just starts running the commands that you tell it to. And then at the end of the run, you have a known configured server. And so the same goes with deploying your actual application. This one is slightly less idempotent because it's kind of always going to do something because you're telling it to deploy. So we have it download our latest Git ref, install all the dependencies, install Node, bundle all the assets, compile all of the packages and the application itself, and then run the mix release, which is the distillery release that then bundles it all together, including Erlang, into a single tarball, which we then copy out into a release version folder, and then resymlink, restart the application through systemd, and then poof, we have our newly deployed application.
That's really helpful. And you mentioned in the first part of that it's analogous to Capistrano, which we use in some of our older like Ruby on Rails environments, right?
Yep.
Okay, and if you could maybe also give us like that high level overview for distillery, because if you're a junior developer, you might not know what that is. Yeah,
distillery is I think that the current idea behind it is that it's going to be the bleeding edge of where Elixir is headed for deployments. It bundles up what's called an OTP release, which is a pretty old idea through Erlang that kind of puts together everything you need for Erlang, the Erlang runtime system, ERTS, I think. All of the packages that you've installed that get compiled down to the Beam files. So all of that is bundled up into a single tarball that you can copy and paste somewhere. And once you unzip it, or I guess untar it, you have a full system that you can just turn on, and assuming you have the correct configuration, it'll just connect and be a full running Elixir Erlang application.
Okay. And is that distillery process that you just described happening within your Ansible playbook?
It is. Yeah.
Okay. So that really clears it up. I want to go over to Dan, talking a little bit more about deployments. How are we able to get zero downtime deployments at SmartLogic, Dan?
Well, as Eric mentioned, we're not really doing a whole lot with OTP releases and hot upgrades in that regard. We're building those releases, but we're kind of doing a hard restart every time. And so for right now, we're mostly getting to those zero downtime updates just by using load balancers and rolling restarts across a fleet of nodes.
Okay. And how are these applications that we are deploying, how are they performing, Dan, compared to other applications that we have in production?
Well, they're performing great. Traditionally we would, see a lot of memory leaks over time, or just, with Ruby, when we're processing large JSON objects or doing a lot of API work, there's a good chance that you'll allocate some memory and maybe never quite get it all the way back. And so often, we've felt RAM constrained in many systems as opposed to CPU constrained. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing that I've noticed with our production Elixir applications is just memory utilization is flat and low, and kind of no matter what we throw at it, it stays really low. We're also seeing just phenomenal response times. If you've ever booted up Phoenix and kind of messed around with it, you'll see microsecond response times instead of millisecond response times, and that's fine for local things. And once you get into the real world, things start to creep up, but they're definitely still much faster than some of our previous development efforts.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, maybe you could dive a little bit into like application architecture, especially as far as like clustering is concerned, multi-node. You're kind of the expert in that. Do you want to talk a little bit about clustering applications?
Let's just clarify. The expert in clustering at SmartLogic. there's definitely forever to learn going forward with that. But yeah, so I've done a bit with clustering. I gave a talk at ElixirConf this year, which we can leave in the show notes, called Going Multi-Node. That dealt with libcluster and figuring out different parts of OTP that are set up to deal with the clustering for you. So libcluster just kind of connects all of your nodes, and then once you're connected, you fall back to OTP at that point. So there's libraries like PG2, which is process groups. You register a name, say I'm in it, and then you can get all the members and kind of broadcast messages around to all of the members. And there's other tools like Amnesia, if you want to distribute a database. There's lots of gotchas around that, so make sure that's what you want that. But yeah, it's mostly process group stuff and just sending messages to PIDs, because Erlang is great, and as long as you have a PID, you can send a message to it anywhere in the cluster. So,
and maybe you could reduce it even further for me so that I could understand, like, what is exactly is clustering, and like why is it valuable to know, and why is it being easy in Erlang important for us?
So specifically what I'm talking about is Erlang ships with the distributed protocol, I guess. So you can connect two Erlang nodes together, and then once they're connected, they are effectively one system. There's still a lot that is set up to deal with specifically one node. So that is like if you're using the Elixir registry, that is specifically for that local node. It's not a global thing. There's a few libraries out there that have kind of spun up within the last year or two. One's called Swarm, one's called Horde, that help dealing with spanning the whole cluster in terms of a registry. Right. So once your nodes are connected, like it's effectively a single system as far as processes are concerned, right? So you can just send a message to any PID. But the reason we want this, right, the real question there, is that if a single node goes down, you can construct your application so that the other node or nodes in the system then notice that died and then act on it, right? So I have a side project that is called Xventure. That's the project I show in the talk previously mentioned. So that you can spin up with 3 nodes. If one node dies, the rest of the cluster notices and says, oh, everything that was on that node now gets spun up between the 2 nodes that are remaining. And then within a second or two, depending on how fast things go, then it's as if nothing had happened. And we just continue on. If the other node comes back up online, it rejoins the cluster, and you can push everything back out across it. So then you're like, it dropped and came back into the same cluster, and no one is the wiser. Effectively.
So I want to try to like sum this up here, because I'm about to segue into another question that's sort of related. But when you're talking about nodes, you're talking about servers, right, that are running the same application, and so they're able to do. This creates redundancies in the system, and it's able to.
Yep.
Okay. So that's really interesting at the like highest level of abstraction. But then if you come down to the application level on a single machine, the question, I think you know what I'm going to ask here, is about like background tasks and concurrency at the level of a single node. Can you talk maybe a little bit about how we're handling that? What kind of tasks we are handling, and how we think about solving these single node background tasks?
Yeah. So I have recently transitioned to, so I guess we use two different ways. So the way we started was we use something called Virk, which uses the Sidekick process, or Sidekick, I don't know, Redis protocol, I guess is what that is. So it uses Redis as its like storage for all the jobs. It looks exactly like Sidekick to Redis or whatever, and pulls off a job, works on it, and says it's done, pulls it out of the queue, etc. So the reason we went with that is because it's a known quantity to us. We knew exactly how Sidekick worked because we've done plenty of projects with it. So it's just one less thing to change when we transition to Elixir. I've recently started to become a lot more comfortable with you just turn on a gen server somewhere in your supervision tree that is like that worker, or you can make it a pool of workers, and you just send messages to it. Though that gen server gets the message to do some work, does some work, and is like out of the we're in a concurrent environment. It's its own little mini thread, and it can do whatever it wants and not impact the rest of the system. It's in the background and whatnot.
Okay, and so when people talk about Elixir being really good at concurrency, they're talking about both at the high level that we discussed earlier with like separate nodes working in a cluster, but also at this lower level of on the given node having lots of libraries really that provide these background processing primitives. Is that like a fair summation of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's less about libraries and more just the language itself is built to be concurrent. So it'll utilize every CPU core that you have, I think, by default. So it's just the way that the gen servers are all set up, and how the scheduler bounces between each one to try and give them a fair amount of actual process time and whatnot. So each process is effectively a thread. It's not, but that's what you can sort of think of it as. As a single-threaded application or like function, whatever you want to, module, object, whatever you want to call it, I guess. But
well, so and I want to get a little bit into the libraries. Dan, you're the big boss here at SmartLogic, and so like when I want to pull a new dependency into a project, I usually check with you first before I do that, because when you're working with other people, you want to get their feedback on dependencies you're pulling into projects. What libraries are we using here at SmartLogic that help us build Elixir applications very quickly and with a high degree of reliability?
Sure. Well, I'd say to start with, one of the things we kind of love about Elixir and the community is that we don't need a whole lot. There's a lot of primitives into the language that give us kind of the things that we need. Everything Eric's talking about with gen servers and the OTP, it's, those things are just there. And so we can do a lot of things without pulling in external dependencies. So in some regards, Eric mentioned Virk, because we were used to using Sidekick and we wanted something that had that same pattern, to not make too many changes at once. We started using that, but we may not necessarily reach for it going forward because the primitives of the language give us the things we need. But there are certainly some fundamental components that we pull in, and the big one being Phoenix, the web framework. Also Ecto, which for managing our Postgres databases and the repository pattern, change sets, and being able to query and modify a database. Ecto is phenomenal, and it's one of my favorite things about having switched to Elixir. We mentioned earlier Distillery to help us build our releases. There's a lot of community effort behind making Distillery even better, and it's had a lot of progress over the last couple of years. And it's gotten a lot easier to work with, and really gives us what we need to build a nice binary release to run on a server. Bamboo from the well-known Thoughtbot crew is a great way for us to send emails and template out emails. Has a lot of different adapters for the various email providers that our clients may or may not be using, or transactional email servers that we prefer to use. Integrates really well there. Quantum is a great way to schedule tasks and basically just have one of your functions run at a given time. It kind of removes the need for an external cron state. You certainly can accomplish some of these things just by having your supervisor spin up tasks and schedule various message deliveries and things like that. But sometimes having that known cron pattern is something you would want, and building it right into your binary is easy with Quantum. Almost any modern application has to deal with dates and times and time zones, and the Timex package is really great for that. And then the other one I think we pull in pretty often is CacheX, which gives you a really great pattern for defining caches when you're querying external APIs and you don't necessarily need to get fresh data every time. You can really do some good in-memory caching with very minimal implementation code using the CacheX package.
And all the libraries that you just mentioned are open source, reliable, community supported, regularly updated and maintained. That's all true, yeah.
For everything that I've mentioned, yes, that's absolutely true.
Very cool. I love the open source world. So I want to ask, I want to stay in this vein of sort of libraries, but I want to move more toward like the third-party services that we're using in production, email, payment processing, that kind of thing. Eric, you're kind of our guy for third-party API integration here. Have you struggled with any of these integrations in the Elixir environment? What have you worked with?
No, I don't think we've struggled at all. A lot of these, so like we use like Stripe, Square, Twilio, done some even SOAP stuff with MindBody. I think a lot of what we've done is just avoid looking for any kind of existing client, partially because Elixir is new enough that these things don't have one. But I've also kind of gone with the like a mentality of being more explicit and like using more primitives that Elixir kind of pushes you towards. So we just have each project just uses the straight HTTP API that these all have. We have HTTP Poison most of the time, another library that's a HTTP client that like we have a module called Stripe. It has exactly the functions that we need it to do. It does exactly what we want and just calls directly their API. So that way we don't have to deal with integration issues of like the Elixir Stripe client or the Square Stripe client, if they exist, and like, oh, this works most of the way, but it doesn't do exactly what we want. So now it does exactly what we want. So yeah, that's been a great change, I think, in general.
Right, Elixir makes it very easy for us to spin up those custom integration modules. Dan, do you have a story where Elixir has sort of saved the day in production? Anything?
Sure.
Yeah, anything you could share there?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest way the Elixir has saved the day in production is that it hasn't had any problems. And things are all kind of quiet and things move along as they should, which, maybe isn't necessarily a language feature other than the fact that it is a stable, production-ready, and reliable platform, which is what you want, right? So I would say a lack of problems is certainly a production win. I think the big thing that is Elixir specific, because of its underlying Erlang core, is the supervision trees and the way processes are handled. And so you'll see that systems are architected in a way such that there's processes that handle talking to Redis or processes that handle talking to the database. And one thing that we'll see kind of blip across the screen every once in a while is errors from those systems when the external dependency goes down for maintenance or has a networking hiccup or things like that. And the reality is that the system, the way Elixir and its supervision trees work, is it'll just kind of restart those processes and rebuild those pools, and the services become available to your code again without the entire system going down. So it's kind of like a little bit of fault tolerance, a little bit of self-healing, and it's just kind of the way things are expected to work. Yes, we know that sometimes external dependencies don't work out exactly as they should, and the system's designed to kind of recover and keep moving forward. And you can certainly take that same pattern and extend it into a much more complicated, a much more robust way of doing things. And we haven't really had that need directly, but it's great to know that it's there. It's part of the core, and we see it work, kind of day in and day out in the very basic things that we're starting to do with it.
Right, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Eric, so okay, I've heard a couple times mentioned. This is a question that I have, I guess. I've heard supervision trees mentioned a couple times. Are supervision trees rolled into OTP, or is that an Erlang level thing? And Eric, maybe you could tell us what OTP is and if there are any cool OTP features that you've been using that you want to share.
Yeah, so OTP is, I believe, I might be wrong on this, but I think Erlang and OTP are now the same thing. Like OTP is a standard library for Erlang. So that includes supervision trees, gen servers, and like a whole bunch of stuff that you probably don't know about. There's a pretty good, there's actually a few talks, I think, on YouTube from ElixirConf, a few ElixirConfs that kind of just show all of the stuff that is in OTP. So those might be a good thing to look out for as well. I guess the standard stuff that we use for OTP, supervision trees, gen servers, something called ETS, which is the Erlang term storage. So it's a local, really, really fast reads and writes for any kind of term you want to stick into it. It's kind of like global memory storage. Some other cool things, I've done a bit with GenTCP, which is a way to, I think you can stand up a TCP server or be a TCP client, so you can just kind of connect to stuff. Other cool things, Amnesia is part of the built-in libraries. There's a...
What is Amnesia?
Amnesia is a replicated database, sort of like Postgres, but inside of Erlang, I think is how you can think about it. There's a disk-based term storage as well called DETS, DETS. There's an SSH client and server built in. There's like all kinds of cool stuff should you need to use them. That just kind of ships with OTP. So...
Well, maybe one day we'll do a whole episode on cool OTP features. Dan, so I've got one more question for both of you. We'll start with Dan, and then we'll let Eric close it out. Dan, if you could give one tip to developers out there who are, or maybe soon running Elixir in production, what would it be?
I would say, kind of jump in and read the docs. I think some of the places where we struggled a little bit early on was just like understanding how the system boots up or how distillery works and how to get our system configuration just right so that we can, monitor the right PID and know that things are up and running and restart things should anything go wrong. Not that anything has gone wrong, and just kind of have that good like server monitoring hygiene is probably where Elixir is the most different from what you've done in the past. So that's where I would probably focus my attention. And this good thing about Distillery having so much focus from the community right now is that the documentation is getting better and it's becoming a more and more robust tool with every passing day, or probably even passing hour. So it's a friendly community. Dive in, read the docs, ask questions in the Elixir forum or in the Elixir Lang Slack. You'll get the help that you need and just go for it would be my advice.
Awesome. Eric, same question.
Yeah, so kind of continuing with that is to dive in and figure out exactly how to do a distillery release, and look into their config providers, specifically the config providers. Being able to spin up on Heroku with just mixed phx.server is pretty cool, but being able to like drastically level up and making an like actual Elixir release is a pretty amazing thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Dan Ivovich, Eric Oestrich, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And once again, this has been a production of Smart Software with SmartLogic, talking about Elixir in production. Join us for our next episode for more conversations on Elixir in production. Thank you. Have a great day.